Hello and welcome back to Pixels with Purpose, where the CSS is important and the function is undefined. Today, we are joined by Kilian Valkhof, who is a front-end developer, user experience designer, and self-called generalist. He does back-end visual design, marketing, and DevOps if need be. He's also the creator of the Polypane browser and builds other tools for developers, designers, and other people who work on the web. Welcome, Kilian. It is great to have you here and to finally talk to you for the first time since knowing you for about 5 years.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Andreas, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about accessibility, and especially how we can improve accessibility on the web. And I know that, Kilian, you have some interesting takes on this. A lot of the idea for this podcast or this episode actually came from an article you wrote, almost 5 years ago now, on this very topic. And we'll obviously link that as well.
Yeah, I'm excited to solve accessibility in the next hour or so.
Good.
So the first thing I wanted to talk about is I think accessibility has a marketing problem in that it's not cool, it's not hip, it's not hype. And a lot of the discussions around accessibility on the web can get quite heated and can get quite finger pointy. And I think your article addresses a lot of this. So I wanted to start with a little discussion about that. Does accessibility have a marketing problem? Discuss.
I don't think so, in that, accessibility isn't necessarily cool, but a lot of the other stuff we do isn't necessarily cool either. So it's not significantly less cool than, say, discussions about CSS frameworks or whatever. So I don't think that developers willingly go accessibility. Oh no, I'm too cool for that. I don't think that's necessarily the case.
So you're saying we need to bring the other topics down to the same level instead of making accessibility cool?
I mean, that's a tough question. So I think all the other things that people do tend to discuss a lot are things that affect them instantly. Like if you pick a CSS framework and I don't like the way the class names are called, then that personally affects me. Whereas, I am sighted, I have all my 10 fingers, I have no disability. So if you write crappy code that, adds an on-click handler on a div, then I'm still going to be able to click it. So it doesn't affect me personally. So I'm not confronted with it being an issue. And I think that's more the core of it, where for most people, the web just works. And that, developers aren't that different from most people. So for most developers, the web also just works. And that leaves like all the other things that do directly affect them to be points of discussion.
This actually brings me to an interesting topic. So I've been like an advocate of accessibility since starting my work on the web. But earlier this year, I had very, very painful hands. And I went through the process of learning how to code and use my machine and navigate the web with my voice. I will link a blog post in the description below that I wrote about doing this. But there were some things that became more apparent to me, accessibility-wise, when I had to use the web like that. In particular, it was, I didn't used to have copy code buttons on my code snippets on my blog posts, but it's like nearly impossible when you're first learning to use your voice to highlight text and then copy it. So you need like a really quick way to do that when you're not using your hands. And so I think that is a perfect example of if it doesn't affect someone, then it's hard to know to do it. And that really is the title of your blog post, isn't it? For many, accessibility is an unknown. If you don't know, if you haven't experienced it, then how can you know unless someone is telling you, or you know someone who's experienced it? So I think a lot of the time, accessibility issues are found in the wild just because people haven't experienced the need for fixing them.
Yeah. I want to add to that I also think accessibility is really hard. I've been building web apps for many years. I'm not good at the accessibility aspect of it. I've tried a lot, and obviously there's low-hanging fruit. Don't make a div instead of a button if you want something to click on. But there's also just, we have a whole career of designers, UI designers, for designing the visual interface. But there's a whole other level of how people interact with your apps, which is not how you do it. And it is hard. And I think maybe there's been a lot of times where people say, oh, it's really easy, you just need to do this and this and use the platform. And the reality is, if you're building something complex, accessibility is difficult. And it takes time to learn to make a very accessible website.
Yeah, so to Selma's point, I think what's interesting there is that you added the copy button because there was an accessibility need. But actually now that there is a copy button, it's extremely, it's significantly easier for everyone to copy that code. So like even me with my mouse, who has no issue like dragging to select text, it's much easier to just click the button. So you added an accessibility consideration, but it made your website better for everyone. And I think that's very often the case when you do accessibility work, that lo and behold, you did some work and now your website is better for everyone. So in some ways, you know, adding, or in the purest form, adding accessibility makes your website better, but it makes it better in ways that also include everyone that had no problem with the website to begin with. And I think when you say accessibility is difficult, I'm not sure I fully agree with that, but I do think that, you know, accessibility isn't a single thing, because what makes a website accessible to you isn't necessarily what makes a website accessible to me. For example, you know, people will say you need to add a dark mode because that's more accessible for people who have issues with bright light. Sure, but if you have poorer eyesight, then the dark mode isn't the accessible version of your site, it's the light mode, because that provides significantly more contrast because there is more light reaching your eyes, and you know that's how eyes work, etc. So accessibility is difficult because you need to build stuff for many different situations rather than, you know, the one you personally experience right at this moment.
Fully agree with that. I love a dark mode, but I can't read a lot of stuff in dark mode with my bad eyes. And it's interesting that developers have this weird thing around how dark mode is the best mode, and if you use light mode, you are lesser than. It's a very strange conversation, especially when I'm streaming and I open up something in light mode. Everyone is complaining, my eyes. It's like, well, my eyes, if you want me to read what's on the screen, I need to use the light mode, please.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting way that we've defaulted to the dark mode.
Yeah, so I've been using a dark mode syntax theme for the past 5 years, because for the past 5 years I worked right next to a window, because that was the space available in my house to work. And if the sun shines in your face and you're trying to read a dark or read text on a dark monitor, that's just not gonna happen. So again, there is nothing wrong with my eyes that I know of, but still, like situationally, light mode would be better. And there's Microsoft has done great work in this. Like to very quickly go over it, when people say accessibility, they usually associate it with people in wheelchairs or people missing their hands or other very visible disabilities. But you can also have sprained your ankle, and then it's also difficult to walk upstairs. But that disappears. And I'm going to be a bit convoluted now, but you might have a child hanging on your leg as you're trying to walk. And that is situational. So there's permanent, temporary, and situational impairments and accessibility considerations. But again, if you make your product better for one of these categories, it magically becomes better for all the categories and for everyone.
Can tools that we use as developers help us with this, rather than us having to research every single thing that we can do to make our apps and websites accessible? Are there things that tools are doing or can do for us that kind of nudge us along the right path?
So I think yes and no. I think for like many things are automatically testable, and there's many tools that will, for example, be able to flag a portion of contrast issues. They will be able to flag incorrect HTML syntax or constructs. But it's very important to realize that a browser isn't made for you. You as in the developer, but a browser is primarily made for quote unquote consumers. People that consume Google ads, people that consume cat memes, people that consume whatever Amazon sells these days. So it's in the browser's best interest and also in the HTML and CSS specification writer's best interest to be as forgiving as possible. Because if the browser can still make out some of it and make the page somewhat visible, accessible, interactable, it's going to try to do that because that means that the vast majority of people will have a decent experience and they'll be able to consume whatever they're looking at. And I think a lot of developers forget that the browser is doing that. It will happily sort of try to fix your broken HTML and still display some stuff. If you write weird CSS, it's just going to ignore that. And that's good. That's really good. But it does mean that developers, as they build, don't necessarily get confronted with the things they should improve. And I think that's where tools can really help. So in my article, I advocate for a strict mode or a hardcore mode or a no-chill mode of the browser, where rather than being this forgiving thing, which is really nice for end users, it can be very pedantic. When I was young, we all thought that XHTML would have been the future. XHTML is a version of HTML encoded in XML. That has some benefits, but one of the downsides of XML is that if there is an error in your XML, the entire document will fail to render because that's the way XML is specified. So if you made a mistake there, no one would be able to use your web page, and that's bad. So rightfully we went the other direction with HTML5 and we continued having a forgiving parser. But as a developer, I actually want to know that I'm doing something stupid or I'm doing something that the browser has to compensate for. So I think that would be really interesting. And I think a lot of tools try to operate on that level, but they do have to deal with the browser having already sort of fudged whatever you were doing wrong into something at least displayable.
That reminds me of a time I had a very, very annoying bug in an application, and I couldn't work out what it was. It was a very complex, like, front-end template. And it turns out that I hadn't closed an anchor tag, but the browser had closed the anchor tag. So I was searching for days for the fix to my weird problem. And that's when I learned that the browsers try to fix your mistakes. And it's not always good, like you say, for the developers, because it can waste a lot of time. Fun fact.
I think you make a strong point in saying that tools can do something, but they won't be able to solve the problem entirely, right?
Yeah.
There'll be things where we basically, there's no automated ways of just addressing this. The developer needs to make a decision. They need to be aware. But I feel like tools can do more to then bring it to your attention.
Yeah.
And so this is an area I'm really interested in at the moment. I think we've tried a lot of different things. We said, well, we could, again, said maybe we shout loud at people saying, do more accessibility. We do courses. We do all sorts of things. There's a lot of content being done on it. So the knowledge is out there. But I don't know that the impact in the industry has been there. I don't think accessibility has generally gone up on the web in the last 10 years, for example. Right? So I wonder if tools could be the catalyst and bringing it to people's attention.
Yeah. So I think there's a few levels to that. I think that when it comes to like frameworks and libraries out there, that a lot of them now come with like accessibility batteries included. Like most modern drag and drop libraries will also work with keyboards. They will announce their actions to screen readers using live regions, etc. And these are all things that you as a developer might not think about, but if you use these libraries, you just get it for free. Conditions apply. What I think most of the shouting accessibility courses, etc., miss is that they are the right thing at the wrong time. And this is like my philosophy for things in Polypane, and it seems that you're doing that as well. Is that you want to give the warning at the time they're creating the issue, in the place they're creating the issue. Because if they're separate, like you build your code, yada yada yada, site gets deployed, accessibility auditor comes in and comes back with a bunch of issues, then one, your site has been live with issues for a while, and two, it takes a lot more effort to remedy any issues found because you probably moved on to the next project, so you have to git check out, set it all up, download the database, get that back up running. There's a problem with NPM, you got to fix that, and then before you know it, a week goes by and now you get to fix the alt text. So that is not a good experience for developers. It would be much nicer, and linting tools do this, Polypane tries to do this, like as you write code, the tool should go, you just wrote something that should be fixed. And then the other part of that is there's a way to say or to explain all the ways that this issue can be remedied, which is usually not what you should do. And then there's, telling the developer, do this to fix it and move on. A very common example is that a lot of accessibility tooling, when they encounter an image without an alt attribute, they'll go, oh, this image doesn't have an alt attribute. You can add a role of presentational. You can add inert. You can add an area label. You can do, whereas, and then one of those options is add an alt attribute, and it can be empty if it's presentational. But now it's the developer's problem to figure out which of these 6 issues is the thing they should do. And so you're sending them out into the world to go figure this out. Whereas if you know what role presentational is, you really don't need that list. And if you don't know what role presentational is, you also really don't need that list. You just need to be told, add an alt attribute. Yeah. And I think a lot of tooling like tries to be like 100% correct, but then it's not helpful. And I think if tooling is more helpful, if it's like, if you don't know what you're doing, just do this, then they can do that and move on, rather than, having to decide, am I going to spend the next half hour figuring out which of these 6 options is the option that is best suited, or am I just going to fix this ticket and make my project manager happy? Because most developers, for pretty good reasons, will choose the latter.
Yeah, I think I've added a fair amount of images with MTL tag at some point earlier in my career because it fixed the warning. And the tooling literally just checked, is there an alt attribute? And, now it went away. You sort of come back to that and go, well, we made the issue go away, but the problem is very much still there, right?
I also think that some accessibility tools can give you false positives as well, and you have to, again, take the time to use your judgment. I use the Axe dev tools quite a lot to look at my pages while I'm building a new page, and especially when you're using like background graphics and a lot of things with maybe SVGs and things, those tools can't really understand the context of what you're presenting on the page. And they'll tell you that color contrast fails when your designers have checked that it doesn't, and that it doesn't, but because it can't read the whole situation, these automated tools. So there is then the case for taking that time to understand what you're doing and how you're doing it and what implications that has. And a lot of the times I have just like kind of really compromised on design to avoid those types of issues. Like I haven't used this background image, or I haven't made this look as fancy as it could, because these tools are flagging up these issues that then I have to spend the time like really digging into.
Yeah, so that's a difficult problem. Because again, like these tools aren't the goal; they are just a method. So your goal shouldn't be to be what they call like X clean. Like it shouldn't be your goal to have an automated tool flag no issues. One, because automated tools can only check so much, and a lot of WCAG accessibility is actually about, is the content understandable? Are you reaching the people you should reach with this text? Is it built up logically, etc.? And automated tools can't tell you if that's the case. So even if an automated tool flags an issue for you, you can still decide that no, actually, the automated tool can't correctly check the color contrast because there's a filter going on or whatever. Though a lot of tools can handle like things like filters and text strokes and text shadows and take that into account. But you can decide that no, I used the color picker and I checked it and it's fine. It passes. It has the contrast that I need it to have, so I'm good. And I think that's where, if you have like CI/CD linting, and you can't merge your PR until there are no accessibility issues according to an automated tool, that becomes very iffy. And again, that's where developers go, I just want to make the checkbox green and move on to the next ticket. So I'm just gonna do whatever is needed to get this thing to shut up so I can get on with my life. And I think that's a shame.
And it does bring us round again to this type of topic that's being discussed a lot, especially around the topic of AI, is that developers were building stuff for humans, for the consumers that the browsers are also rendering for. And automated tools are not human, and they don't have that human experience. They don't really have the nuances around all of this. And I think, like you say, for time management and for keeping those project managers happy, potentially we're becoming too reliant on automated tools. And I mean, let's not even get started on accessibility overlays that claim to fix everything about your site, because they do not. And at the end of the day, as software developers, we are human, building stuff for humans, and we have to take that human approach. And we just can't rely on tools protecting us, telling us what to do. But that kind of stuff takes time, and it takes critical thinking. And I still think that there's a lack of that in our day-to-day, given arbitrary deadlines potentially, and all of this stuff that we've just got to get out there and do and make and fix and make money for the shareholders. No time for thinking, just do it, right?
Yeah. So I think that's a top-down issue, which again comes back to awareness. But I do think it's good for developers to realize that, like, accessibility is not a zero-sum game. As in, if you fix one accessibility issue and there's still 10 left, you still did a pretty good job, because your website is now slightly more accessible than it was before. And you can always improve, but it's not like you need to fix all the issues and only then do you get to say that your website is accessible. Actually, even if you fix all the issues, you can't say that, because whether or not it's accessible is dependent on your end user, and something that might be accessible to me might not be accessible to you. But yeah, so even small steps make your website more accessible to some people, which is good. So you should never feel discouraged to do a little thing, even if you can't do like the full thing or all the things.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I also think when we talk about tooling, because of the state of where we are today with tooling, we easily fall into the category of talking about validators, right? Etc. Because that is where most of the tooling is today, helping people, right? But I don't know if you saw, but Figma literally, I think a day ago, did an update to their color picker, where it had probably the most, at least complex I've seen, contrast tool built right into it. It's not just that it tells you what the contrast is between like the text you select and the background, but it actually shows graphically on the color picker what values would lie within the acceptable values and what values wouldn't. And this, to me, this kind of tool is an area that's worth exploring a lot more, because it's not just about is it accessible, is it not accessible, about providing, like, building a tool for a human being to make decisions.
Yeah,
and
so
I think that area may not be explored as much as it should be yet.
Yeah, I think when it comes to design tools, there's a lot more they can do. I saw the Figma thing. I think that's nice. Polypane has had that for 3 years, where it will figure out the CSS property that you're working on, then figure out which contrast ratio it should adhere to. For example, text, usually you want 4.5:1, but borders can be 3:1. So it will show that graphically inside the color picker and then highlight the line you want to focus on most. But you can get bonus points for having more contrast in your borders, etc. So it's good that that's also coming to design tooling. And there's way more they can do, like font sizes. I've been dreaming of like a Figma or a Sketch or whatever, where font sizes just start at 12. You can't go smaller than that. Deal with it. If you have colors, then you just can't go beyond that line. because it knows that you're setting the color for a text element, and it knows the background, so you just can't pass that contrast line. I think that would be much better, because it makes the choices easier, right? If you can't make the wrong choice in your design, then you don't have to fix that later either. So I'd like to see them do more, and maybe I think the issue comes down to being opinionated. Like design is opinionated, and what these tools try to do is make sure that they want to be the thing for everything, or they want to apply to everything. But actually, if I'm designing in Figma and I tell them, I'm building a web page, I want them to go, yeah, actually don't do that. That's a bad idea. Because that helps me develop or design a website better in less time.
I think that's a very good point. And also really cool to see that Polypane, I have not had a chance to play around with your product yet. I'm very much looking forward to that, and really cool to see you've had that for so long, because I think that kind of tooling, I think, can really elevate accessibility on the platform.
Mm-hmm.
One element, one conversation that I often find myself having, at least historically, around accessibility is actually a conversation with designers. Because there's a lot of, especially when we talk about contrast and font sizes, I've so many times had conversations with designers saying, well, actually it should be a bit bigger, and they go, no, it looks terrible, or this contrast, can it be a bit more? And they like, yeah, but now it doesn't look very well, right? And I think there's a one nice solution, of course, would be just build the design tools in a way where you're always right by default, because they can't add a contrast that's different, right? And maybe contrast isn't the best example, but I find there's also a lot of times when you have to compromise.
Yeah.
You have to figure out, like, if we want the visual quality and the visual image we're looking for, how far can we go on affordances, for example?
Yeah, so I just heard you say, like, the designer will say it doesn't look good. And that means that that the discussion is being held at the wrong level, because a designer designing web pages isn't designing things to be pretty or to be like good looking. That's not their job. Their job is to make a design that solves for the goals you've set for the web page, which is either sell stuff, inform, and discussion should be measured against that. Like, will this tiny 9-point text help us, inform the user about what we're trying to tell them? No? Okay, then it has to go. And now you're no longer talking about, well, I like looking at 9-point text because I have a monitor that's 2 meters wide, and I'm this close to it, so I'm fine. And instead you're working with business goals, which is what we should all be working towards if we're building anything commercially.
But do you not think that beauty or good looking website is one of those goals?
It can be.
Is that on an aspect of that?
It can be, but then you should define beauty for whom. So if a thing is really beautiful but it's not very usable, then it's art, which is fine. Create more art, but then you have to go back. Like, are we creating art or are we creating something else? And when it comes to goals, there are a lot of rules. And one thing that I really like, that I don't do myself, but I do like, is that when you're setting goals, you need to define trade-offs. So you don't go, we want the site to be beautiful. you go, we want the site to be beautiful, and the trade-off to that is that it can be less useful. So now you've explicitly said that we choose beauty over practicality. And then you can have the argument, okay, well, but this is more beautiful, and even if it's less usable, we're going to go for this. Whereas, I think more realistically, people are going to go, no, actually, we want the site to be usable before we want it to be beautiful. And now that you've defined this, when a designer goes, well, but I want it to look beautiful, or I want it to be pretty, you can go, well, that I do too, of course, but we've decided that we value usability, we value ease of use above beauty. So for that reason, we have to go with this and this and this.
I feel like we could do a whole episode on just that statement.
I bet we could, but it would be unfair not to invite some designers in.
Yeah, of course. But I think you'll find more designers agreeing with that than not.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think most designers, especially more experienced ones, understand that design is in many ways about constraints. It's about problem solving a lot more than it's about art. But I will also say that I've moved a little bit on this scale as someone who's like, but why aren't you doing the thing because it's the right thing to do, Mr. Designer, or Mrs. Designer for that matter? Why aren't you doing this thing when clearly this is the right? To understand that every one of those conversations is going to have their own merit, their own set of trade-offs. As an organization saying we value usability over design, over the sort of visual feeling of the app, I think it's not a decision you have to make once. It's a decision you have to make at almost every feature level. You can set some overall standards, but every one of those comes with different trade-offs, right? So I don't know if I don't think that conversation has gotten easier over the years. I think it still remains difficult, and it's still ongoing in many ways. In my work, at least.
Yeah, but so that's why having those trade-offs be explicit is so useful. Yeah. And that's why most of the things that in our industry that stay, like the Agile Manifesto, is very clearly making all those choices. Because if you just say like everything's important, then you always end up in discussions on what is more important, and you can have differing opinions on that, and having those differing opinions is fine. But that means that you never reach a conclusion. And also, I don't think necessarily that being more accessible means you have to lower your standards in terms of how beautiful a site can be. I don't think those are orthogonal. And framing them as such can actually make your discussions more difficult than they have to be.
I very much agree with that. I think that the solution usually lies somewhere not in between, but on a different axis of saying, what if we just do this way instead? Of course, that third axis is then time, of having to spend extra time finding out what is the solution that solves both problems, right? But I very much agree with that. I have one question that I've been mulling over. It's a bit of a different topic, but it's on the topic of tooling, because obviously AI is something that every podcast and everything online has to cover every time. You can never talk and not say AI. So I've been wondering, like, given the, let's say, state of accessibility on the web, which is, there's still work to be done. Let's put it like that, right? I've been wondering for a long time whether AI could actually be a fantastic tool for accessibility, not just in potentially helping developers do better, but actually as in building a new generation of screen readers or accessibility tools focused around AI. Because there is a lot of capabilities that's been unlocked recently that really wasn't feasible before.
So when you say AI, do you mean LLMs, or do you mean like some mythical generalized AI or thinking machine, or do you just mean like ChatGPT or Copilot?
Probably mostly ChatGPT, in the sense that it wouldn't be the language model. I think the visual processing would probably be a bigger part, right? But I see the main thing is, as a developer, we often build for visual first. Like, here's the thing you click, and then tagged onto that is the keyboard navigation. Tag onto then is the attributes for the screen reader, etc. Right? But visual tends to come first.
Yeah.
And a system that can process a visual interface should theoretically be a very good basis for accessibility tools or assistive technology.
Yeah. I haven't seen that yet, which is actually strange because, everyone's putting that in their cars to detect pedestrians and stuff. I'm pretty sure you could do that to detect buttons. It shouldn't be much harder. That said, LLMs only work by the grace of being trained on data. And that's also the big caveat with code right now, and especially in terms of accessibility. If your AI is trained on hundreds and thousands of bad examples, and then there's tens of thousands of good examples in there somewhere, it's only going to do the absolute right thing occasionally, because it can't pass judgment on, or the millions of sites it parsed, which all have knowable, detectable accessibility issues. It's just going to go, out of the millions of data that I have gulped up, the most common thing to click on is a div. Yay! So then it'll tell you that. So if you don't already know that that's a bad thing, then you haven't actually gained anything by using AI, except it uses more power and you have to wait for the thing to complete. So I am not necessarily... So I think there is merit in the visual detection AI stuff in combination with other tools. Like, it would be great if... There are certain ways to control your screen by having it be divided up in a grid, and then you can select which part of the screen you want to focus on, and that becomes a grid, and that becomes a grid, etc. And that's very frequently used for people that can still only move their eyes, because then they can look at that part and then blink and then select, etc. If that could be combined with something that recognizes, actually these are all the areas that you might want to interact with, that would save time, that would make it easier for those tools to work. So I think there's opportunity there, but someone has to build that, and that someone has to make money, and I don't think at the moment those align, unfortunately. Which is a shame. But yeah, so in terms of what we have right now, it doesn't really improve things in terms of knowing about accessibility, because it's going to return you the most statistically probable thing, give or take some randomness. And that means that it's usually not the best way to implement something. So yeah, caveat emptor. You need to know a little bit. You need to be able to judge the code it gives you before applying it.
So I want to finish up with a quick fire question that I've just thought about off the top of my head. Kilian, I want to know what you think is the most underrated HTML element tag, and why should we be using it? How do you use it? And why do people not know about it? Go.
I don't spend a lot of time thinking about HTML elements, so I think like there's a few common, or like a few common examples. I think form elements are underrated, but they're making a comeback. Like all the major frameworks are now going, if we use a form, that actually gives us a lot of things for free. So forms are great for gathering all the information from the form elements, because rather than having to go like element by element and doing element.value or event.target.value or whatever, if you have a form and you submit it, you get a form data object that just says everything. It's just a neat little package of everything you care about in the form. So I think that's probably the most underrated one. And then the other one would be the checkbox input, because you can use it for a lot of stuff. You can use it for things that would normally be buttons, but that you want to have a state. And that then comes back to, we haven't even touched upon area in this talk, but area is a way of adding accessibility features to elements that don't already currently have them. The first rule of area is try to use the regular HTML elements or regular HTML features if those are available. Like area is there for when that's not possible for a variety of reasons. So rather than having a button and then listening to the on-click handler with JavaScript and then adding an area pressed is true when the toggle is on, etc., you can just have a checkbox, and then when you click it, the browser checks it for you. You can get that value very easily in your JavaScript, in your CSS. It's already visual. So I think that's an underrated feature as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Andreas, would you like to finish the episode?
I actually would love to finish with a few more questions for Kilian. I have a few more really quick ones. One of them, if people want to learn about your browser, where should you go? Because that seems like to be a good start if you want to get better at accessibility.
Exactly. So you can go to polypane.app or polypane.com or polypane.dev, or you can type in Polypane in your favorite search engine. You can even type polyplane if you want to. If you misremember or misheard me, that also works. And then you can try at the browser for 2 weeks. If you do, go check out the docs. There's an accessibility overview in there with all the tools that it has to help you improve accessibility. And that's things from automatically finding contrast issues in your page and then suggesting improved colors. So it will automatically calculate like the nearest accessible color for you to save you time, to a feature I added like just earlier this week, which is incredibly specific. But if you know about area label, which can help you add accessible names to elements that would otherwise not be understandable by screen readers, then you might not know that area label doesn't actually work on a number of different elements. So if you have a div and you add an area label, that doesn't actually get read out by screen readers. So in Polypane now, if we detect that you use an area label on an element, or more specifically on a specific role of an element that doesn't support it, it will give you a gentle warning, tell you like, actually this isn't going to work in some screen readers, so you probably don't want to do this. So it's all the way from high level to very low level, trying to be helpful, trying to help you figure out and guide you to making your pages more accessible.
Excellent. I highly recommend people go and try that out. I'm very much looking forward to diving in. So I think tools like this is going to make a big difference in sort of helping developers navigate the world of accessibility, which can be very difficult. It can be a little bit intimidating, at least from personal experience, when you sort of start learning about it. thank you very much for coming on. I think it's been a really great conversation, and I've loved hearing your takes. I've loved learning about a bunch of stuff I did not know, including the fact that ARIA label wasn't going to be read out if you didn't put a proper role on it. So that's been really good. Yeah, and thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
And we'll see you next time on the next episode of Pixels with Purpose.